Hello, this is Tim Wright. Welcome to Being Reintegrated. We are on the precipice of releasing a brand new type of book, and I'm super excited. It's called The Illuminism of Genesis, and what this book is it's a commentary on the chapters of Genesis. Now, I know my thought exactly is, why do we need another commentary? This is stupid. I don't want to deal with a layperson, not a biblical scholar, telling me about the books of Genesis. And that would be pretty much my sentiment too. So I understand if you're feeling that way. Um, Particularly why this is so interesting, and I go over this in the introduction, which I'm wanting to make free on academia.edu, but I'll just do it here since that was my thought anyway. Now I'm gonna read it, of course. I wrote it, but I want to read it to you because it's a pretty profound introduction to the Illuminism of Genesis, and it shows just why we need something of this nature. Uh, so let me go ahead and pull that up. For decades, the Illuminist community has awaited a work worthy of the title Illuminism of Genesis, and at long last that work has arrived. The wait has been long, and in some ways a disservice to those who sought a more profound understanding of the subject. Yet the very length of this wait underscores the significance of this project. The production of these volumes is not just an academic achievement. It is a necessary corrective to history, a bold attempt to set the record straight, and to address the gaps left by previous works. The reason this work has taken so long to materialize is largely due to the sheer academic rigor required by the subject. The complexity of the ideas at hand and a careful methodology needed to explore them have made it a daunting task. This is why until now no one has ventured to publish a comprehensive volume that can genuinely meet the standards set by the foundations of Illuminism. Despite the challenges, this series stands as an effort to clarify and expand upon the legacy left by Auguste Chauvet, whose ideas continue to inspire and challenge contemporary thought. At its core, this work is an expansion of a methodology first developed by Chauvet, but one that still eludes a full understanding. To those unfamiliar with Chauvet, it is important to explain why his work has inspired such an ambitious undertaking. My own understanding of his theories comes largely through the insights of Robert Amadou, a devoted student and amanuensis of Chauvet, whose work continues to illuminate the path forward. In the early 1980s, Amadou presented a lecture to France to a group led by the renowned scholar and esotericist Jacques Breuer. It was in this lecture that Amadou offered a deep dive into Chauvet's intellectual lineage and the profound impact Chauvet's work had on the study of religious languages. According to Amadou, Chauvet was deeply influenced by the philological rigor of Jean-Baptiste d'Olivet, but Chauvet also found merit in the theses of his contemporaries, particularly in the work of Jean-Baptiste d'Olivet. Olivedra. It's hard to say these words, but this is what it is. Together, these figures played a crucial role in the development. Together, these figures played a crucial role in the development of the ideas that would form the foundation of Chauvet's own theories. To understand Chauvet's intellectual journey, it is essential to look at the two core theses he embraced. The first of these ideas is a theory put forth by Olivedre. It's hard for me to say that. Which posits that there is a unifying language of initiation, a hidden linguistic thread that runs through all religious traditions. According to Olivedre, this initiatic language forms the basis of esoteric knowledge and is a key to unlocking the deeper mysteries embedded in sacred texts across cultures. Chauvet's Second key influence was the work of d'Olivet, who proposed that the Hebrew language contains a hidden core, an esoteric linguistic structure that reflects a deeper mystical truth. D'Olivet sought to demonstrate that Hebrew was not just a historical or cultural artifact, but a language deliberately crafted to encode esoteric knowledge. D'Olivet's approach to Hebrew was groundbreaking. He argued that the language could be deconstructed using a system of root words derived from a three-letter core premise, allowing for the reconstruction of an entire vocabulary that reflected deeper truths. He believed that the language itself was imbued with a mystical significance, a notion that Chauvet would later adopt and expand upon. Chauvet took these two theses, the unifying initiatic language and the esoteric core of Hebrew, seriously, and worked to integrate them into a coherent framework. He postulated that there is indeed a hidden esoteric language that runs through all religious traditions, one that transcends the boundaries of individual languages. This language, Chauvet suggested, was not only a tool for conveying spiritual truths, but was deliberately encoded within the text of sacred traditions, each word a cipher carrying layers of meaning accessible only to those initiated into the secrets of language and initiation. However, Chauvet's work did not simply rely on the ideas of others. He sought to prove them. While Olivedre's Archaeometer, a kind of linguistic wheel designed to reconcile Sanskrit, Hebrew, Latin, Greek, and a language called Vatan, remained largely unproven, Chauvet's approach was far more nuanced. He argued that the esoteric structure of language was not only a product of cultural interaction, but was also a direct reflection of the initiatic process itself. In other words, the sacred texts of different religions were not mere narratives, but were embedded within a linguistic system that mirrored the process of spiritual awakening. It is important to note that the work of Olivet and Olivedre, while profound, did not entirely prove their theories. Olivedre's system was based on an idea similar to Raymond Lully's Wheel of Language and Variation, but it lacked the empirical backing needed to fully substantiate his claims. Chauvet, in contrast, presented his theories with a blend of skepticism and intellectual rigor, challenging his predecessors while furthering the investigation into the esoteric core of language. In addition to these intellectual contributions, Chauvet's work was grounded in the conviction that Hebrew was not just a sacred language, but also one that carried an inherent esoteric structure, one that scholars have yet to fully uncover. Chauvet's belief in the existence of a hidden, unified initiatic language provided the conceptual framework for his life work, and it is this framework that forms the foundation of this series. In many ways, this project is a continuation of Chauvet's legacy, an attempt to build upon his insights, clarify his arguments, and present his ideas in a manner that is both accessible and rigorously scholarly. It is not merely a restatement of past theories, but a forward-looking exploration of how these ideas can shape our understanding of language, religion, and the deeper mysteries of existence. Thus, this volume stands as both an intellectual tribute to the work of Auguste Chauvet and bold steps forward in unraveling the mysteries of language and initiation. It is a call to scholars, seekers, and initiates alike to recognize the profound depth of this esoteric language that transcends time, culture, and tradition. Chauvet's method of analysis is built on a revolutionary approach to language, one that goes beyond the conventional methods of gematria and traditional intellectual analysis. His method takes each individual Hebrew word and analyzes the letters themselves, not through their phonetic sounds or numerical values, but through their ideographic meanings, the symbolic essence of each letter. In this system, the letters themselves are seen as symbols that represent fundamental concepts and deeper truths, rather than being reduced to simple sounds or numerical equivalents. This approach is radically different from the conventional methods of interpreting sacred texts, which often rely on gematria, the practice of assigning numerical values to letters, or phonetic analysis. Chavez' method shifts for the focus from the superficial to the symbolic, grounding the text in a more profound, intuitive understanding. This break from traditional methods allows for a deeper intellectual connection to the sacred text, one that seeks to unlock meanings hidden beneath the surface. In my own research, I came across a concept that deeply resonated with Chavez' approach. The Kabbalistic teachings of Maimonides, for example, mention the work of the chariot and the work of creation. While I found substantial material and insight on the work of the chariot, the work of creation, particularly as it relates to Genesis, remained elusive. This gap in understanding seemed to be tied to Chavez' assertion that the Ezra priests were pivotal in championing the esoteric knowledge embedded in the first chapters of Genesis, specifically the first 10 chapters. This was a revelation to me, as I had never encountered such a clear distinction before. And you should know, I mean, I'm reading that, but you should also know that there's a little bit of information about the priests of Ezra that we kind of might want to know. So that's why I'm doing this presentation, to give it for free, but to lock it into the common knowledge of humanity. And it's very important. The priests of Ezra are most often associated with the period after the Babylonian exile, when the Jewish people returned to Jerusalem under the leadership of Ezra, circa 5th century BCE. The priests during this time were crucial in the restoration of Jewish religious life and practices. Ezra himself is considered a priest, scribe, and scholar, and his efforts are chronicled in the book of Ezra in the Hebrew Bible. His work focused heavily on the religious and cultural rebuilding of the Jewish community after the exile. Let's break down what is known about the priests of Ezra and their role. Ezra's role in the priests. Ezra was a scribe and priest in Babylon who led a group of Jewish exiles back to Jerusalem during the reign of King Artaxerxes I of Persia. Upon his return, he sought to reestablish proper worship in the temple, ensure the observance of the Torah, and rebuild the community in a way that was spiritually faithful to the traditions of Israel. Ezra and the priests of his time played a central role in the reconstruction of Jewish religious identity following the Babylonian exile in 586 BCE. The exile had caused significant disruption in Jewish practices, and many of the people had become assimilated into Babylonian culture. Ezra's role was to ensure that Jewish laws and traditions were observed properly. This is not anti-Semitic, by the way. I don't get into that. It's just the history of the Ezra priesthood. Take of it what you will. But it's important to understand these points for the presentation of Chavez. In biblical tradition, the priesthood is traced back to Aaron, the brother of Moses, who was the first high priest of Israel. The priests of Ezra's time were likely members of the Aaronic priesthood, which had maintained certain duties and rituals even during the exile. However, after the Babylonian exile, there was a need to reestablish the temple cult in Jerusalem, which included offerings, sacrifices, and other sacred duties. Ezra himself is described as having come from a long line of priests. He is said to be a descendant of Aaron through Zadok, a prominent priest during the time of King David and Solomon. In this sense, Ezra's role was not just as a religious leader, but also as a continuation of the priestly lineage that had been instrumental in the service of the temple. One of Ezra's significant achievements was the reestablishment of the Torah as the central religious and legal authority for the Jewish people. This is where the priests came into play. They were the ones who facilitated the reading, interpretation, and enforcement of the Torah laws, which had been largely ignored or forgotten during the exile. Ezra's reading of the law is a famous scene where Ezra reads the Torah aloud to the assembled people. This event marks the renewal of the covenant between God and Israel, and the priest played a key role in ensuring that the people understood the laws. The Levites, a subgroup of priests, helped to explain the text to the crowd. The priests in Ezra's time were responsible for leading worship, ensuring the purity of the community, teaching the Torah, and overseeing the sacrifices in the temple. They were also involved in religious reforms that Ezra implemented, such as enforcing a separation from foreign marriages, which was a significant issue at the time, as some Jewish men had married non-Jewish women during the exile. One of the most significant aspects of Ezra's work was his emphasis on the religious purity and the proper observance of the law. And this introductory lecture goes on and on and on, but you see that Ezra was very, very pivotal in the understanding of Torah. So I'll go back to my text now. As Chavez suggests, the Ezra priests were custodians of this esoteric tradition, which they passed down through sacred texts. Their focus on the first 10 chapters of Genesis was no accident. These chapters hold the key to understanding the foundations of creation, life, and the divine order. This insight motivated me to rigorously test the theory and apply Chavez's ideographic method to these sacred texts. The process involved translating every word in the Hebrew language for the first 10 chapters of Genesis, not through traditional linguistic methods, but by analyzing each letter's ideographic meaning. This was a profound exercise, one that opened up new vistas of understanding. Instead of providing a simple commentary on the text, I presented my findings to allow others, new researchers, esoteric enthusiasts, and Illuminists to discover these revelations for themselves. The sheer depth of insights uncovered through this analysis was striking. So what I'm saying in this introductory is that I did not provide commentary. Although there's tons of commentary that can be done on these texts, I didn't do it. My job was simply to deliver the goods, and I feel like I did so. Given the complexity of the material, I grouped the findings into thematic volumes, each focusing on specific sections and key themes. These volumes are structured as follows. Volume 1 is Genesis 1 and 2. Volume 2 is Genesis 3 and 4. Volume 3 is Genesis 5 and 6. Volume 4 is Genesis 7. Volume 5 is Genesis 8. And Volume 6 is Genesis 9 and 10. So those are the books that are available through the Illuminism of Genesis series. Now, in the future, I'll do commentary on these books because they're profound, but I just wanted to make sure that we get everything out in the open and everybody knows everything. Since, most of what's to be found is in the mirror of your own mind, taking this text in and coding it for your own need. It's not for someone to preach to you and tell you what it's supposed to mean. So this puts you a step above all those that'll do that. Through the exploration of these esoteric themes, we're better positioned to understand and contextualize the material that relies on core mythological and formulaic expressions found within the Hebrew Scriptures. What becomes increasingly evident is that the Ezra priesthood, the ancient custodians of this sacred knowledge, seemingly encoded the first 10 books of Genesis in a profound and deliberate manner. Their use of language and symbols within these texts was not arbitrary, but crafted to transmit esoteric wisdom in a way that would remain concealed from the uninitiated. This insight opens up new possibilities for interpreting Genesis, particularly when we consider how many of the traditional doctrines surrounding sin, the fall of man, Satan, and other deeply entrenched theological ideas have been shaped by the first books of Genesis. Over centuries, these texts have been used to solidify dogmatic tenets that form the foundation of much of Western religious thought. These ideas, often framed in stark moral terms, have contributed to many of the theological constructs that we rely on today, especially in understanding human nature, the divine, and the purpose of existence. However, this traditional understanding, rooted in fundamentalism, is now being increasingly questioned by scholars and spiritual seekers alike. The long-standing interpretations of original sin, a fall from grace, the notion of Satan as the adversary are becoming less satisfying to those who seek a deeper, more transformative understanding of the universe and our place within it. These old tenets, although useful in their own right, often come with heavy doctrinal baggage that many modern thinkers and esotericists find limiting or even troubling. By reinterpreting Genesis through the lens of the Ezra priesthood's esoteric encoding, we can begin to offer an alternative doctrine, one that can replace the outdated and often unappealing interpretations of key theological concepts. This new framework does not discard the rich symbolism of Genesis, but reframes it in a way that highlights its deeper spiritual truths. Instead of focusing on sin as an inherent flaw in human nature or the idea of Satan as an external force of evil, we begin to see these concepts as symbolic expressions of the human condition and the spiritual journey. This esoteric approach provides a richer, more nuanced understanding that moves beyond moralizing dogma. It invites us to see the fall of man not as a historical event of disobedience, but as a symbolic initiation into the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The tree of knowledge does not simply represent the fall into sin, but the awakening of human consciousness to the complexities of existence, the dualities of good and evil, and the very nature of free will. Furthermore, by moving away from the traditional understanding of Satan as a separate, external being, we can reinterpret this figure as a symbol of the inner adversary, the shadow side of our own consciousness that we must face and integrate on the path to spiritual enlightenment. The ancient esoteric wisdom encoded in Genesis invites us to confront these inner forces, not as enemies to be defeated, but as aspects of ourselves that must be understood and transcended. In this sense, the esoteric interpretation of Genesis offers a pathway for spiritual evolution that transcends the rigid frameworks of dogmatic religion. It provides an alternative doctrine that speaks to the esotericist, the seeker, and the philosopher, those who desire a deeper connection to the divine and a more profound understanding of the mysteries of life and creation. This new approach to the first books of Genesis is not just an academic exercise. It is a spiritual reawakening, a rediscovery of lost knowledge that can inspire those who are ready to move beyond the limitations of traditional religious thought. Through this esoteric lens, Genesis becomes not only a creation myth, but a blueprint for human spiritual growth, a guide for understanding our place in the cosmos, and a key to unlocking the deeper mysteries of the divine. The production of a text that offers an alternative framework for the esotericist, one that does not adhere to traditional forms, is in many ways a revolutionary act. For centuries, esoteric teachings have often been entwined with religious and doctrinal frameworks that limit their scope and impact. Modern esoteric traditions, especially those in Masonic contexts, often remain deeply rooted in Christian symbolism, even when they claim to offer something beyond the orthodox. This observation was poignantly made by the Gnostic bishop Duke the Palatine, who noted that many contemporary esoteric groups are essentially dressed-up versions of Catholicism, replete with ceremonial pageantry, rituals, and hierarchical structures that echo the very religious systems they claim to transcend. I have often encountered the same criticism in groups like Martinism and Elucoan, where the foundational tenets still appear to be strongly rooted in Christian esotericism. While these traditions have certainly developed their own unique systems of thought, they are often, at their core, not so far removed from Catholic mysticism. Their continued reliance on Christian symbols, the concept of salvation, and the ritualized structure of initiation maintains a connection to a religious framework that has historically been used to explain and control the relationship between man, nature, and God. This adherence to religious forms and doctrines, while deeply meaningful for many, can, I believe, restrict the potential for true spiritual progress. Esoteric wisdom, when viewed through a rigid doctrinal lens, risks becoming a mechanism of control rather than a tool for personal transformation and universal understanding. What we need is a framework that allows each element, man, nature, and God, to be viewed in its own right, with proper context and dignity. Instead of subordinating one to the other or attempting to create a uniform system that reduces these concepts to simple categories, we must allow them to stand alongside each other, each with its own inherent value. Man is not merely a vessel for divine truth. Nature is not mere backdrop for human action, and God is not a distant figure to be worshipped from afar. Each of these elements is inextricably linked, yet each deserves its own space and recognition in the cosmic order. To truly understand the relationship between man, nature, and God, we must break free from the constraints of the doctrinal systems that have historically governed our interpretations. We must seek to redefine these relationships through esoteric understanding, one that is not limited by theological boundaries, but instead seeks the unified truth that runs through all things. Only when we approach these concepts with dignity and respect, allowing them to coexist in their fullness, can we hope to move toward a more complete and transformative understanding of the universe and our place within it. This redefined relationship between man, nature, and God opens up a new avenue for exploration and spiritual insight. It paves the way for esoteric practices that are not merely rituals to appease a higher authority, but are active engagements with the world, aimed at transforming consciousness, realigning our relationship with nature, and deepening our connection with the divine. This text, then, seeks to offer a radically different perspective, one that challenges the traditional boundaries of esotericism and proposes a new path, free from the constraints of old religious systems. Through this lens, esotericism becomes not a way of reinterpreting an old worldview, but a way of creating a new one that is more inclusive, holistic, and spiritually empowering. In re-examining the first chapters of Genesis through esoteric lens of the Ezra priesthood and the ideographic core of Hebrew language, we are presented with a profound opportunity to transform the way we engage with ancient texts and spiritual traditions. By unraveling the deep symbolic meanings hidden within the words and symbols, we are not simply decoding an ancient story, but unlocking the doors to a deeper understanding of creation, divinity, and the human experience. The insights gleaned through this approach offer a new path, one that moves beyond the constraints of doctrinal, dogmatic religion and toward a more holistic, inclusive vision of the divine. As we reconsider the relationships between man, nature, and God, we see that these concepts are not to be separated or subordinated to one another. Instead, they must coexist in a dynamic, interwoven relationship that honors the divine unity at the heart of all things. Esotericism, when freed from its historical entanglements with religious authority, can become a tool for spiritual evolution, a means to bridge the sacred and the profane, the known and the unknown, the inner and the outer worlds. This text stands as an alternative to the esoteric traditions that have been shaped by centuries of theological influence, offering a framework that does not rely on outdated notions of sin, fall, or satanic forces. Instead, it invites the seeker to engage with the mysteries of existence in a way that respects the dignity and sovereignty of each element. Man, nature, and God. It is an invitation to deepen our relationship with the world around us, to reconnect with the divine in a more direct, transformative way, and to reclaim the esoteric wisdom that lies within the sacred texts, not as a tool of control, but as a vehicle for personal and collective awakening. In this pursuit, we are not just revisiting old ideas, but creating a new paradigm, one that transcends the limitations of past religious systems and opens up new possibilities for understanding, healing, and growth. The work of esotericism is not merely to decode ancient mysteries, but to engage with them, to live them, embody them, and allow them to guide us toward a deeper realization of our true nature and our connection to the cosmos. As we move forward, let us approach these sacred texts and esoteric traditions with renewed respect, curiosity, and openness. Let us honor the wisdom of the past while embracing the transformative potential of the present and future. In doing so, we can ensure that the esoteric path remains a living, evolving journey, one that leads us not to rigid answers, but to the infinite questions that will continue to inspire and guide us as we navigate the mysteries of life, death, and the divine. So that is my introduction that I wrote to these 6 volumes. The reason why. This is going to refute the doctrines that are falling into some of the highest thinkers about the highest topics to control you, the English-speaking public, to try to understand in their way. I'm refuting their core premise. You know who you are. We will no longer use the fall of mankind as the fall of men. We will no longer use sin as a somewhat indomitable force that will force you to never be able to get free of the clutches of a priesthood that only offers you sacraments and never understanding and quells your pain. We will move forward. We will preach this doctrine. We will help those who are afflicted, and we will heal those who are wounded. I thank you so much for watching this very long presentation on the Illuminism of Genesis.